Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast, episode number 8. Thanks for downloading. This is Mike Higman, and I've got my co-host, Adam Cruz from the Volunteer State. Adam, what's going on, man?
I am just excited to be on this earth another day.
I just want you to know I'm sitting here sipping some Grizzly Bean Coffee, getting ready for our episode, enjoying that.
There's no better way to prime yourself for a podcast other than with Grizzly Bean Coffee.
I needed a little bit of a pick-me-up for the episode, so brewed some up real quick. So if you're a loyal listener, pick up some Grizzly Bean. It might make it a lot cooler. I don't know.
It might, and when you drink coffee, you have a little bit of attention deficit disorder. At least I do, because I get so much caffeine rolling through me, and that usually leads me to going to the internet and shopping and buying something. So you might check out huntinggeardeal.com.
You should. You should be checking that at least
every day.
Yeah, really, you should be checking it every day. I mean, it takes 10 seconds to see if there's something on there you want to see. Adam, this past weekend, what'd you do?
I'm a little boy, had a church camp where it was kind of like learning how to sing, choir, Southern gospel, that sort of thing. So we went to watch that finale, and then I have a good 6 acres of yard to mow, so I had a little bit of time on the mower. But you know, how about you?
Well, 6 acres, man. That is what kind of mower do you use? This is way off topic already, but I'm curious.
Okay, so down south, you have to have a Dixie chopper, right? A Dixie chopper, 60-inch. That sucker will fly. Yeah, I like my lawnmower. I like to mow, but I don't like mowing 6 acres.
Yeah, I think I have like the third biggest yard in the entire county, and I've got half an acre. So I don't know a whole lot about that. And, you know, I felt I felt like until this last year, I had to mow my own yard because that's a man thing to do, right? But
yeah.
It got to the point where I was spending, I don't know, 2-3 hours. I know it's not a ton of property, but I had always sprinklers broken, always, I don't know, something to trim. And I finally bit the bullet and hired a lawn service. And man, I'm so glad I did it. It is like,
it's worth it.
So much more time left every week. So I was doing the math, and it was like, man, am I going to spend $1,200 a year to pay somebody else to mow my yard? I was thinking, man, that's crazy. But then I got to the point where it's like adding up the hours, and to have all those hours back in time I can spend with my kids and hunting and, you know, all that other stuff, no regrets. So save some extra money on your hunting gear on huntinggeardeals.com. Save $120 a month somehow, and maybe your lawn's only $50 a month, whatever it is. If don't worry about being a man too much. If it makes sense, get somebody to your yard. So now, if it takes you 15 minutes to do it, suck it up. But that wasn't the case for me.
Yes, suck it up.
Yeah, that's my tip of the day. And
good tip.
Take the time you were going to use mowing and do something cool.
Yes.
So
and listen
today,
to our podcast.
Today on the episode, you can listen to a podcast where you're mowing. So I guess if that's the time
yes.
you listen to the podcast where you're mowing, don't get a lawn service. Keep downloading Down South Hunting.
Over and over again.
Yeah. So today we got David Toms coming on. I found David Toms on the Hunting Beast website, which is a forum for hunters led up by Dan Infalt. If you've never been to thehuntingbeast.com, check it out. Click on active posts. Really cool forum. But David is from Texas, and I think he's got a lot to share with hunters. He's been hunting for a really long time. So let's go ahead and get him on the phone and quit blabbing. Today we're going to be talking to David Toms. He's got almost 40 years of bow hunting experience behind him, and most of it's been with a recurve. He's hunted in a bunch of different states. He hunts out of a saddle. He does his own taxidermy work. Basically, you're hunting Renaissance man, and he does a lot of public hunting land as well, and I think we can all learn a lot from him. David, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
David, can you just kind of give us your hunting background, how you got started, and maybe some of the different places you've hunted and your experience?
Sure. Gosh, I guess I started when I was about 14 years old. It's about the time Fred Bear started making some of his older videos and stuff, and I guess I saw one somewhere. Not really sure how, because we didn't even have a TV in our house back then, but that kind of lit a fire. And if I remember right, the first bow I ever bought was a Howitt Hunter recurve bow, and I practiced with that thing pretty much all the time. And the first shot I ever took at an animal was actually a whitetail deer, and I hit it. It was probably more out of luck than anything else, but that kind of got me going. And it, I'm from Texas, and Texas is a big gun hunting state, so I didn't even know anyone shot a bow and arrow back then. Certainly no one that shot any kind of traditional equipment. In fact, when I first got in it, I don't even think the compounds were out yet. So I kind of learned as I went. There wasn't a whole lot of material out there on bow hunting at the time. Before tree stands, the portable tree stands that we all tend to hunt out of now were even on the market. So I just kind of went from there. I got some of Gene and Barry Wenzel's early videos and Paul Bruner and stuff, and I was in the Air Force at the time and moved up to Montana and got to meet some of those folks. And that, what can you say when you're listening to Gene and Barry Wenzel and Paul Schaefer and Paul Bruner and some of those old time heroes. And Miles Keller was another one that I was fortunate to meet that kind of lit a fire in me. So I've been hunting with traditional bow and arrow for, like you said, close to 40 years. It might actually be 40 years now, 40 seasons. And there was one year where I used to do a lot of weightlifting, and I hurt my shoulder, and I tried a compound for that one year, and I absolutely stunk at it. It was just too many mental things that I had to kind of go through. I'm kind of a instinctive shooter. I pick a spot and let my arrow fly. So I did try it for a year, but boy, I blew a shot on a pretty decent buck, and that was the end of my compound hunting days. And I went back, and I've been shooting longbow and recurve ever since then. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm not sure if you want me to talk about, I was in the military and stuff like that, but.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I really wanted to know how you decide to stick with the recurve all of that time, and I guess that kind of fills that in. But yeah, maybe give us kind of a rundown of how you went from being a 14-year-old to maybe hunting mature deer, how that evolution happened.
Well, probably the thing that got me the most started, I trapped a lot. We didn't have a lot of money when we moved to Texas. I was born in Kentucky, and my dad was in the Army, and we moved around quite a bit. But I started trapping a lot in my early teens and stuff to make some money for school and stuff. And, just being out in the outdoors and stuff like that kind of just got me interested in that whole lifestyle. And, picking up a bow, like I said, Fred Bear, can't really remember. I think it was a Dahl sheep hunt he had up in Alaska, some short video that I watched of that. There was also the Howard Hill short films and stuff back then that kind of got me going. But, man, you know how it is. Once you get that in your blood with archery, it's kind of hard to get out of it. And like I said, the first arrow I ever took was at a small, I think he was a 4-point buck, and it was probably way past my maximum shooting range, certainly further than I shoot now. But it was probably close, I'm going to guess 40, 45 yards, and it was a lucky shot. But, man, that kind of got the hooks in me. And the whitetail there were pretty abundant in Texas at the time. There wasn't a whole lot of other big game species to go after. So that's just kind of what I focused on. And back in those early days, too, when they first started coming out with some of the Field and Stream articles and later some of the old videos, except for the people that were going to all these remote places, the majority of them were on whitetail deer. So it was just a natural evolution that's what I focused on. And then I just fell in love with it. The whitetail deer is just a fun animal to pursue.
I think it's really interesting to hear, guys that have been hunting for a long time. So many of them start out by saying, "Yeah, I'd probably shot further than I should have, and I wouldn't do that anymore, and I know better now." It's funny, I guess, 30, 40 years ago, things were a little bit different information-wise, and yeah, a lot of guys were just figuring out for themselves, because there weren't, a lot of bow hunting hadn't been popular long, so a lot of these guys weren't learning from mentors, just kind of figuring it out as they went along.
Right. That's true. I remember I used to grab anything I could find about Miles Keller. He was just someone that absolutely fascinated me. And, a lot of the modern day people are gravitating back to some of the things that we did way back 30, 40 years ago. We hunted bedding areas back then. We didn't have a lot of time. Certainly we didn't have the seasons and the tags and stuff that we have nowadays. And we tended to focus on where the animals were. And, if you hunt for any length of time, you'll quickly realize a whitetail deer don't spend a whole lot of time during daylight hours outside of his bedding area. So that, it was just natural. And Miles Keller was the first one I ever remembered that really talked about hunting bedding areas. So anything I could find by him, I grabbed hold of.
Well, I know you hunt quite a bit of public land, and I hear from a lot of guys from Texas, there's not that much public land to hunt. And I'm kind of curious, have you always hunted public land a lot? I know you've traveled around as well. You said with the Air Force. Has public land always been a big part of your hunting?
Right. I'd probably say 80 to 90% of my hunting over the years have been public land. But it's so different nowadays. Back 40 years ago, you could knock on just about anyone's door, and they kind of looked at least in Texas, they looked at you kind of strange. We didn't have a bow season back then, so they kind of looked at you kind of strange when you said you wanted to try to bow hunt. It just wasn't something being done a lot of. So, you could knock on a lot of doors back then, but over the last 20 years, absolutely, probably 95% of my hunting has been on public land. It's getting really hard to find good quality hunting land that, private property that if you don't know someone, a family member, or something to get on anymore these days. I do occasionally take trips to Ohio and Nebraska and some other places that I do know some folks, and I get to hunt on some private farms. But 95% of my hunting, especially in Texas, Oklahoma, Montana, Washington, some of the other states I've hunted has been public land.
How many states do you travel to each year to hunt?
For the last 5 or 6 years, I've been hitting 3 to 4. Usually I'll hit Texas and Oklahoma. I live right on the border, so I'll hit those states just about every single season. I've been going up to Ohio now for, 5, 6 years. I've got some friends up there, and I usually take a week hunt up there. And I've hunted Kentucky, Missouri, Illinois, and a few other states. Usually 3, 4 states a year.
There's a lot of different habitat types here in the South, and just so guys and girls that are listening can get an idea of how to relate, can you kind of give us an idea of maybe the type of habitat the land that you hunt the most is?
Yeah, boy, that's tough because Texas alone, within a 4-hour drive of where I'm at, you can get into the plateau grassland country. You can get in some hilly country. There's a lot of sage and brush country, and then if you get further back towards the east, you get into the pine forest, and then up towards the northeast, it's more your rolling hill oak type habitat. So
that sounds like a lot of fun.
It is. It's challenging because each area, some areas. What I always tell people how I focus, or when I get a piece of property, how I tend to hunt it. I keep the basic needs of a deer: food, cover, shelter, and water. Water's a big thing out in the arid Southwest, so I always try to find what's the least common element. There's a lot of cover and a lot of food, then I might be working towards the water aspect close to bedding. Or if I'm out in the grasslands where there's, a lot of open country, I might find those isolated pockets of timber and concentrate my efforts on there. to me, it's just easier to break down a big piece of property if I look for what's least common available that they've got to have on a daily basis. And water holes out in this part of Texas where I live, water holes, September, October, even into November, we have 80-something degree weather. So those can be prime places to ambush a big buck, especially a rutting buck that has been chasing does or whatever. He's going to come in for a drink.
So if let's say you don't have knowledge of all these different areas and you kind of have the choice of where to go in blind, what would you say your favorite type habitat to hunt would be? What's the first thing you're looking for?
Well, now that's a tough question. I will tell you, if I could hunt anywhere for a big buck, of course it's the Midwest. And even in that environment, you take Ohio for instance. Parts of Ohio where I hunt, there's a lot of farmland, cropland with isolated timber. So obviously, when I'm looking at that kind of country, I'm doing a lot of glassing, and I'm trying to focus in exactly where those bucks are coming and going into bedding areas. It's really hard in those environments, especially during the daylight, to get in on those bucks. They usually have a good high vantage point. The cover's kind of limited in size and stuff, so you got to do some planning. But I'll try to hit them where they're coming and going from that. You get down further into the southern portions of Ohio and stuff, and you start getting into more cover. So in those cases, I might try to target my where I'm going to set up on a food source. If there's a predominant food source where I can find the right kind of sign, I'll try to figure out where more than likely they're bedding or whatever, and using natural corridors. And I'll set up as close to the bedding, but en route to that food source. So it really depends. Favorite? Wow. For sheer pleasure, you can't beat Montana Bitterroot Valley. Just the scenery and the diversity of wildlife, and just being in a tree is awesome. But and there's also some good bucks up there.
Well, I was going to tie you down to the south, but I feel like that's kind of unfair at this point. You got some really good options.
Down here, a lot of people underestimate the South. There's some good bucks, and they're definitely not as common as in northern. In fact, I hear there's a lot of debates online a lot of times about where the best place to kill a big buck and where is it easier and stuff. I'll tell you the difference that I found between hunting like the Midwest and the true South. In the true South, when you find a Pope and Young buck, you better be on him, because the likelihood of another one ambling by on public land is not very feasible. So it's, places where I've hunted: Ohio, Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee. The odds of a good deer, if you're setting your sights on 135-inch or above buck in those states, you're going to see them. Down here where I hunt, if you get on a Pope and Young buck, you better go after him, and you better do it smart, because you're going to have one, maybe two shots at him, and you may not see another Pope and Young the whole season. So it just, to me, the densities of good mature animals are just not as common in the South. And so that, to me, is the hardest challenge, is finding those deer and getting on them. The actual hunting and stuff, it's I don't really find it no harder or easier in any one location. There's unique challenges to every place. The South, 80 degrees, 90 degrees during November rut can lock the deer down, and you may not even see them out cruising during the rut. Of course, if you've hunted down south any time at all, you know about mosquitoes and gnats, the buffalo gnats we got down here. The reptiles are still out in November. So wading through creeks sometimes in the pre-dawn morning can be kind of exhilarating, to say the least. So
I was watching one of your YouTube videos earlier today, and you're talking about wading through one creek. I guess it's 3 or 4 feet deep, with your waders on and moccasins swimming by during, I think it's November or December. Wow. Not for me.
There was one time, I think it was 3 seasons ago, I was hunting a creek up in Oklahoma, and it was about chest deep, and I'm going in 4 o'clock in the morning, got my headlamp on, and I got my bow over my hand with one hand and my pack on the other, and a water moccasin probably swam 2 foot from me, and I'm sitting there chest deep in this water and the snakes. I'm like, boy, I hope you don't decide to crawl up on me for a rest.
Please don't see me. Please don't see me. Well, given your experience, what advice can you give us as far as what we should be doing right now to be getting ready for next deer season, as far as scouting and trail cameras and all that good stuff? What are you doing, and what should we be doing?
Well, it's kind of funny because I'm in a transition this year. I've been in the process of moving and stuff, so and taking a new career. So I haven't done what I normally do. But usually this time of year, if you don't have mineral sites set up, if you can use them legally, and having cameras of them, I usually set those up about February. And I use a lot of mineral sites, especially to take inventory and to see if they're, what's new on a place. So that's probably this time of year, late June, early July is when I'll probably go in the first time and start actually pulling some cards most of the time to get an idea of, what bucks are still in an area. July is also the time where I start doing whatever glassing I can. When I was in Montana, I did a lot of glassing. It was much more conducive to that. Here it's kind of flat, a lot of mesquite and sagebrush type country. It's really hard to get a good vantage point. But typically that's what I'll be doing. Mineral licks. If you can bait deer, I tend to put some peanut butter out to help draw them into an area. Towards the end of July, I will really start focusing my cameras. Usually I've got a couple target bucks by July that I can kind of look and see, hey, this is going to be one I'm interested in. I'll start transitioning my cameras by pointing them. When I set up a mineral site, I'm always thinking about where I think the buck's going to come from. And I try to set my camera up to where I can capture that. And then it's just a matter of periodically backtracking. I'll get him and see where he's coming in a couple times during daylight. And I'll back up 50, 60 yards. I hunt pretty thick stuff, so I can't go much further than that. And I'll just, about every 2 weeks I'll run my cameras and I will go in there and try to move that. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get as close into where I think he's bedding at. I use a lot of maps and aerial photographs to help me kind of determine where I think he's bedding at, and then I'll move my cameras to try to focus in on that. And I usually don't go right in on the bed. If I'm morning hunting, I do, but if I'm setting up for 80% of my sets, I'm trying to catch them coming into a bedding area or exiting a bedding area. So I will, I'll get to where I'm comfortable distance away, and that's where I'll try to set up. And I've hunted some of these areas for years and years and years, so a lot of times it's just a matter of putting the cameras out, figuring out what's in the area, and if there's a buck I want to hunt, I'm pretty much done in that area. In a newer area, I probably won't even hunt it the first season. If I find a couple, unless I find a stud. Now, if I find a stud, I'm going to go try to kill him. But usually if I go into an area, I set out cameras knowing that I don't know the area well enough if I haven't got to do that post-winter scouting. So I will put the cameras out and I'll kind of let them soak, and I'm really trying to find out what's in the area. And then I'll follow that up with in-season and post-season scouting and try to figure out the area, where the bedding areas are and some of the staging areas and stuff. And then the following spring, I'll do the mineral lick to get a good inventory of what made it through the season. We have so many coyotes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to know about the bedding areas. When you're scouting these bedding areas, are you just trying to find a general area, or are you trying to find like an individual bed, or do you find that typically in the South the bucks might bed in different locations every time, and then on top of that, what exactly are you looking for when you're locating these bedding areas for guys that might not have experience with that?
Okay. Well, now I'm going to go against the grain what a lot of people will tell you. I don't think big mature bucks use the same beds very often in a row. I've never believed that. I've never seen it. I've soaked cameras over individual beds, and I can tell you many bucks use them. Even does will use the same beds, but very seldom do you, unless it's in the only time I found the exception to this rule is in residential areas. There are some places where you can bow hunt actually inside city limits, and in those cases I do find bucks that will use the same beds. And I've hunted Montana, Idaho, Washington, Nebraska, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama. And that's just off the top of my head. And in none of those places do I find big bucks bedding in the same exact bed day after day. I just don't think they do it. I think they get wise that they leave too much scent around. And you got to remember, we're not the only predators out there trying to eat a deer. And any deer that continues to use the same bed day after day is alerting every predator that that's a well-used spot to ambush. So what I look for is bedding areas. And these can range, from a 30-acre woodlot up to, a quarter-mile section of deep woods in the deep south. And it's hard. The south, finding good bedding areas in Kansas is another state I've hunted. In Kansas, Nebraska, those plains areas is far easier, in my opinion, than it is in the south. Anyone that wants to come down to Louisiana in some of the swamp country and find isolated beds, you're going to be spending a whole lot of time out there looking for them, because I just don't think they're there.
I think maybe I've wasted some time here in Florida trying to find some of those, and I've found some what I believe are beds. But
they do use bedding areas, and you can glass and determine, bucks going into the same general area. And then I look for those travel routes. I look for the ones that give the buck a good wind advantage in the morning and a good visual advantage in the afternoon. Because I do find that a lot of bucks won't use the wind as much in the afternoon coming out of a bed, but they're going to use their eyesight. So it might be more open terrain or elevated. But I'll look for those areas where they'll naturally travel through, getting up out of a bed or getting into their bedding area.
How do you typically approach pressure from other hunters? What do you do to get away from other hunters, or do you try to get away from other hunters? What's your strategy when it comes to that on public land?
Well, my number one strategy is to get in early. I like to get in there a good hour before everyone else does. And then I usually try to stay all day. Now, down here in the south, when it's 100 degrees during the early bow season, that can be pretty tough. And we have the long days. My day will start at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm up and getting dressed, and I might be in my stand by 4:30. It's getting light a little bit before 6, and it's probably staying light till almost 7 p.m. So you're talking a pretty long day in the stand, which, a lot of people can't do that. But I do watch hunters. I make a note of where people park. When I'm up in my stand early in the morning, it's pretty easy to see their headlights coming in the woods, so I get a general idea of how they're using the land, the hunters are, and stuff. And, I do exactly what the deer do. I acclimate away from it. That's what a deer is going to do. They're going to move to where the pressure's not.
Do you try to hunt around that pressure or just get away from it?
I try to use it at times, especially in the early season before the deer really get wised up that, there's a lot of hunting pressure on them. I will try to use, and like I said, I've hunted a lot of these areas over and over, so I've kind of got the humans down. Humans are much easier to pattern than the deer are. But you can kind of determine, when the flow of people's coming into an area, you can kind of pick out where the deer are going to travel through those corridors and head to the cover that they don't get bothered in. And I'll try to set up right near the bedding area on those corridors and let the other hunters, as they come in, move them. And I'll tell you something else. I think a lot of people make a big mistake hunting early morning and getting out of their stand too early. I hear all the time you can't kill a buck in the morning, and that I've killed most of my bigger bucks in the morning. And a lot of those have been between 9 and 11 a.m. because my theory is a lot of people get bored. They get up, they start walking around and scouting, and they start bumping these deer. And 90% of the big bucks I've ever jumped don't let you know that you've done it. They don't blow. They don't run off. They kind of stand up and ease off because the wood's pretty thick. And so most of these hunters don't even know they're bumping these bigger bucks. So, yeah, I definitely will try to use that pressure, especially in the early season, to kind of move them into the areas I know they're going to want to gravitate towards.
So when you're doing these all-day sits, do you typically see anything midday, or is it more just a function of you're not blowing an area out, going in and out, coming in for the evening?
It's actually both. Down here in the early season, a water hole can be productive any time of the day, especially if you can find those isolated water holes that aren't on maps and stuff that are really close or even in the bedding areas. I've had bucks come in 2 or 3 times in one day to a water hole. So there's a myth that people think deer just go in and bed down and they stay put all day. I've sat in tree stands and watched deer, and man, if they stay in their beds 2 hours, I'm pretty amazed. They'll sleep for a while, but they'll get up, they'll stretch, they might browse a little bit, they might go get a drink. They're not going to move far, but they definitely move around in the middle of the day. So, but yeah, you're definitely right. Some of the times it's simply because I'm going into an area that I know I have to get in before the deer come in. And if they don't come in, I've got to come out after they leave, if they're in the general area. Otherwise, I'm blowing them out of there.
A lot of the areas I hunt.
South,
go ahead.
Down here in the South, some of these videos, the bump and dump is popular up north. If you've hunted down south, especially in some of the swamps and stuff like that, there's cover everywhere. You would spend a lifetime bumping and dumping deer and trying to figure out where they're going to. So that really isn't something I'm interested in doing. The first time I encounter deer, I want to be able to put an arrow in them.
But actually, you mentioned it's funny you mentioned how there's so much water and cover. What you mentioned about water holes got me really interested. A lot of the area I hunt is full of swamps everywhere, so there's lots of water. But I know there's other areas where it might be more scarce. How do you go about finding one of those water holes? Is it just miles on the ground, or do you do online scouting? What's the best way to find one?
Part of it's just understanding the lay of the land. You're going to find those isolated water holes in natural places that water's going to run. So it could be a ditch off a slight grade of elevation or whatever. But what I also tend to notice is your coyote population kind of. This is one of the things I don't really tell a lot of people, but coyotes don't bed too far from water down here.
Don't worry, nobody's listening.
What I have found is, most animals in arid areas where water's a scarcity are going to congregate pretty close to water holes, and a female coyote is going to not be far from water when she's raising her young. So what I like to do a lot of is in the summertime, I'll get out in the evening time and I'll start using a howler. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but you howl like a coyote just to get those locations. And where I tend to hear a lot of coyotes, that's an area where I know that there's probably water out here. And so, I might go scouting, but most of it is found with boots on the ground. You stumble, especially those nice hidden ones that aren't on maps. 90% of the time I'm out scouting in the middle of the day or post-winter scouting, and I stumble across them. And they go on my GPS.
I imagine there might be a few out there, but there can't be too many guys out there who are using coyote howlers to find good deer hunting spots.
Yep. And what you tend to think is, they're a predator, so the deer aren't going to be, in proximity to the coyotes. And, yeah, they're not going to den on the same hillside or whatever, but water is key down here. And all the animals have to use water, and you will find that most of these animals are going to bed in an area where they can get to and from water holes pretty easily. They can't go a day. When it's 100 degrees especially in the fall, we get 90 to 100 degree weather. They just can't survive without water.
That's man, well, that's definitely some new information. Definitely something some guys should try out.
Might be the most interesting tactic. I was going to say it might be the
Well,
most
and
interesting
like I
tactic or
said,
strategy we've heard in a while.
like I said, that's just one thing, but it's really watching animals. You will notice the congregation of animals. There'll be some land out here that's absolutely void of most life, raccoons, bobcats, coyotes. So even just seeing the tracks in accumulation kind of lets you know that that's an area that's either a hunting area or a bedding, and usually the animals around here are bedding close to water. They just do.
I think that's a really great point. I mean, there's a lot of other animals that are going to be eating the same things as deer, as far as mast and that kind of stuff. So if you don't find any sign of any animals, there might not be predator pressure there, but that might be because there's no animals there for the predators to hunt.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something else we have down south, and I'm assuming you're from Florida.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that accurate? Okay. Well, you have the hogs down there too.
Uh-huh.
So that is a challenge out here. We have become inundated out here in Texas and Oklahoma with wild hogs, and they are absolutely destroying the bedding areas of the whitetails. So, what used to be classic bedding areas 20 years ago down here has changed. The hogs have overtaken that, and the deer are moving into some non-traditional bedding areas.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about that. I saw one of your YouTube videos. You mentioned, dealing with hogs as well. How do you deal with the hog pressure? If you find a lot of hog sign, do you immediately move out of the area? Or is that something maybe, do you deal with it like you would other hunters? How do you deal with hog sign?
You can't get away from them now, so the deer can't either. I note it when I see it. If I'm hunting an area, let's say in the morning, and I have a bunch of hogs in the area that morning, I'm pretty sure that particular day I'm not going to have a lot of deer action. I have at times, but usually, where the hogs are coming into bed for the day, the deer are going to move out of that area. But the next day, the deer could be right back in there. They can't get away from these hogs. These hogs are just everywhere now.
Since a lot of us are mobile and we're always looking for that lightweight solution, I'm always looking at clothing. What type of clothing do you wear in the woods? Do you have any particular brand that you like the best?
Yeah, boy, it really depends. Up in Ohio, I use a lot of wool. I like, what is it called? Hidden wolf wool. I use some of that. I use some of the Berber fleece. Down where I hunt down here, early season, I'm using a leafy suit over t-shirt and shorts most of the time. I love First Light, their merino wool. I use a lot of that.
What kind of leafy suit do you wear?
I've been making my own, but the last couple years I've been using that. It's called a kill suit from Predator.com, PredatorHunter.com or something like that, or Predator Collar.com. You can do kill suit. It's like a Gila suit. It's like the leafy wear material, and it's stringy. And boy, that breaks up your outline. But last year I used the ASAT Vanish leafy suit, and I was absolutely impressed with it.
All right.
I had several deer. I never let an arrow go last year. I was being too choosy probably, but I had several deer peg me moving and looked right at me and could not tell what I was. So that ASAT, I think it's called their Vanish Pro leafy wear suit, that's a great suit. I like those because what I do is I'll throw that in my pack, and then I used to do all the scent control with the scent suits and all that, but now whatever I've got on, I just go out in the woods and I throw that leafy suit over the top of it.
So I imagine the wind's real important to you if you're not worrying about scent control.
Absolutely. One thing, now that's one advantage we have in the South that don't get talked about enough. We almost always, because of the way the temperature heats up so much, we usually have a good updraft in the morning. So it's a little bit easier sometimes to fool the deer's nose. when I head up in Ohio, I've learned that the thermals are a lot more trickier and inconsistent, and I really have to pay attention to what my scent's doing. But it seems like it's always so hot down here that your scent's going up and over the deer's nose, except for, right at first light and then right at as the sun's going down.
We haven't talked to this about anybody on the podcast. Do you use milkweed to judge the wind, or use something else?
Well, I did used to, and I had a guy, I think his name was Five Star over on huntingbeast.com. He sent me some. That stuff's great. So I do now. I definitely use it to kind of keep track of the thermals. Well, what I used to do, what Paul Bruner actually taught me this trick up in Montana years ago, I would get in the off season and use those smoke bombs. And yeah, you're only going to get to see it like 30 yards out. But I used a lot of that to kind of learn how air moves through different timber and canopy and stuff like that.
You know what? That just seems hardcore to me, going out and lighting smoke bombs in the woods for hunting purposes.
Oh, you'd be surprised some of the things I did.
I guess if you're running around the mountains, it's worth your time to go out there and really understand how the thermals are moving when you exert all that energy and is wasted when you made the wrong decision.
Yeah, I want to say something on here too. I hear all the time people encourage people, don't get in your hunting area too much. Don't make mistakes. You're going to educate the animals, and all that's true. But there also is a tremendous amount of learning that happens your first, I'm going to say your first decade of hunting, that you just can't learn from reading books, reading magazines, watching videos and stuff like that. Nothing beats being out in the woods and seeing how game trails move through different terrain, learning how thermals, are affected with something simple like leaf drop and heat and cool and humidity and all those kind of things. So, I always tell people, get out there and keep this fun. We especially when you're first starting out, get some deer under your belt, get out there in the woods, learn other animals, before you worry about getting so hardcore that it's like a chess game. You got to have some fun and play the game for a while before you get ready to enter a tournament.
Man, I think that's a really good point. That's one reason I love hunting public land so much, because I can really see the guy that has, 40 acres or 100 acres and that's all he's got. Well, if he's out there every day of the season, well, probably by the third week of the season, he's not going to see anything. But, he might be able to take all the practice he's getting on public land, and yeah, you got to deal with other people and, other pressure and that kind of stuff. But you sure can learn a lot. And then you can take that experience and plug it into your 40 acres and the 5 hunts that you save up for that. You really make it count. But I totally agree with what you're saying. If you only go out 5 times a year because you're trying not to pressure your property, you're missing out.
Yeah, and for those guys that have those small properties like that, I encourage them, go find some public land. Don't limit. Man, I couldn't imagine just keeping to 40 acres, because you're right, 2 or 3 hunts into there, especially if you're not super cautious with how you get in and out, you're going to have diminishing returns every time. So most states, and I've hunted a lot of states, even a place like Texas, only 1 to 2% of our land is public land, and it gets hunted very hard. But even on that, there's usually some public land corps engineer, Bureau of Land Management, state land that you can get on. And so go hunt those areas too, and save those better places, for those absolute perfect days. Maybe it's during the rut or whatever, save them for that and get some experience out on that public land.
Well, David, there's so much more I want to ask you about it, but I think I'm going to have to limit it to just a couple things.
Okay.
I know one thing is I've seen in the past you using canoes and kayaks and that kind of stuff. Can you maybe kind of talk about a little bit of some of the non-traditional ways you access properties and what's worked best, and give us some tips on that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I do whatever it takes. That's the bottom line. I want to get into an area in a way that the animals aren't used to seeing. And if that's a kayak, I use inflatable rafts. There's times where I will hike back in 2 miles in summertime, and I'll bury an ice chest and I'll keep waders out there so I can use them to cross the creek or whatever. There's been times I'll strip down and cross a waist deep creek for 100 yards in the middle of winter and get to the other side and dry off and stuff. So I will do literally whatever it takes. My favorite to do, of course, is using what I call my new canoe. It's a new canoe. It's kind of a hybrid kayak canoe, but I can just get into areas that you can't get in a canoe. I can get into places, I think it's 4 inches of water. I can haul out deer in it. It's far more stable, not as noisy as some of the old metal canoes and stuff. But that's absolutely my favorite way, is to come in through a water entry. Because what I found is most of the time the deer, I love morning hunting. If you follow me on the Beast, you know that. Most of the time the deer are not near the water's edge right in the morning. So I'm going in what I call their backside. And then, I've got predetermined entry routes that I've cleared and stuff and trees picked out. But I'm getting set up, and they're out in the fields or wherever, in the oak flats or whatever. And I usually can get in without busting them. I hear a lot of people talking about they spook deer in the morning, and it does happen. I mean, you spook deer in the afternoon too. Mm-hmm. In fact, I would say if you're hearing deer blow, most of the time you're hearing probably 1/10 of what you spooked. There's always those older deer that just don't tend to blow as much. But I try to sneak in. I'm a military guy, so some of my military, it's almost like a game to me. I take it like a mission, and I've got time marks that I want to hit these points, and I'm considering moving slow, and I take my time, and I really think through my entry into a hunting place. And a lot of people, they talk about when they hunt in the evening, they just blow out of the area and they don't care about spooking deer. I don't do that. I always try to sneak out as well. Even if I ain't going to hunt that place again in a year, I just don't want to acclimate the deer to what I'm doing, whether it's, I don't want them catching on that I'm coming in by boat, or I'm coming in early, or, the routes that I'm choosing and stuff like that. So I try to sneak in and out without alerting any deer as much as possible. And it's easier in some areas than others, If you got a lot of waterways and stuff, it's probably a good way to go. I have waded down a creek. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I've actually waded a creek probably, I'm going to guess, 3/4 of a mile chest deep water, walking in that creek to get to a certain area. But it was the only way I could get into that without alerting the deer. And, walking through water, especially if it's waist deep, there's a method. You got to practice that too. If you go too fast, you're pushing weights, you're making noise, you're spooking other animals and stuff. So, it's about ambushing deer, and that's what I keep in my mind while I'm picking my entry points, is how do I get in here, and how fast and how slow do I have to move in order to get in here without alerting the deer that I'm here. That's my number one thing I focus on.
How long have you been hunting most of these places that maybe you're walking? To me, the biggest thing, like saying walking through a creek or something like that, I think once you've done it once, during the light or something like that, it doesn't seem so intimidating. But, the first time walking through a creek, you don't know how deep it is and, what's where and that kind of stuff. Are these areas you've hunted over a long period of time, or is that just something where you're just willing to jump in and try it?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, there's definitely a lot of spots I use the same access and stuff. But then there's other times I'll go in fresh into a place. I'm probably not as sharp as the sharpest tack in the box sometimes, and do things that probably I shouldn't do. But, I've spilled myself a couple times on deadfalls and stuff under the water and stuff, But, it's risk. There's some risk in it. I'm not afraid of the dark, and I'm really not afraid of, like snakes and stuff like that. So it's not a big deal for me. I use a red lens when I'm going in, and I keep it pointed, 2 or 3 foot out. I just go slow. I take my time, and I give myself plenty of time so I can work in there without breaking a big sweat too. Because, down in the South, it's 90 degrees and you're not wanting to sweat real bad. But, you know, I've went in over my head a couple times. It happens, you know. I'd much prefer kayak where I can use them.
How you might have touched on this earlier, but I missed it maybe exactly. How much early before first light do you try to get in the stand? I know you said maybe you leave at 3 in the morning or what? Yeah. What's the ideal time to be set up and calm?
I like to be at the base of my tree a good hour and a half before pink light. And it usually takes me, because once again, I go slow. I'm never in a rush. Put my sticks on. I've actually climbed a tree and had the sun come up and had a deer 30 yards from me. 30, 40 yards. So I'm going slow, but I usually like to be at the base of my tree about an hour and a half before pink light, figuring that it'll take me about 30 minutes to climb slowly, get settled, you know, get my pack hung up and my bow hanger and, you know, doing everything slow so that I'm usually about an hour before pink light. However, once you start getting on mature animals, some of these animals have characteristics and stuff. I have been in a tree stand 3 hours before daylight before, just because I knew he would be in that area well before daybreak, and my plan was to catch him coming to a water hole later in the morning. So,
man, that's some dedication. How'd that work out for you?
I never killed him. Now there's some bucks that I have taken, you know, getting in real early. There's other areas I hunt in the morning where, you know what, I'm not even going to try it before daylight, simply because there's one area in particular I'm thinking of right now. It's public land. The nearest wheat field is about a 2-mile hike. Those deer leave that field right at, you know, daybreak, heading back to this bedding area, and it takes them a good hour to get back there. So I will come in right at daylight in that case from the opposite direction. I'll get at my stand knowing that if I'm there, you know, 20 minutes after daylight, I can set up and be in place before those deer.
That sounds like my kind of spot right there.
Yeah, those are far and few in between. and they're cutting that particular place. They're coming through private land from the wheat field, and then I'm hunting on the public land back on the back side on it. So they don't get a lot of pressure, I don't think, on that public land or the private land right there. So they're typically out after, you know, 15, 20 minutes before or after the sunrise.
Adam, I know you had a question you were trying to get in there.
When you're trying to scout for new public land to hunt, what's your priority around finding actual land that you can access by water or kayak? Is that really high on your priority list just because of keeping possibly having less pressure? Or?
Yeah, boy, in Texas it's really hard because we're so limited on land. Yeah, I hunt a lot of lakes in Texas. Usually the Army Corps engineer has some land around the lakes and stuff, so I do look for that. But then again, it's probably not my number one focus. What I look for typically is I look for smaller parcels of public land that are relatively close to some crop fields or something on private land. And when I say relatively close, deer down here have no problem moving a mile to a crop field and coming back. So, I'm looking for those small overlooked places, and then if it's got water access, I'll definitely use it. If not, I'm going to use a dry creek, open field. That just comes from experience getting in there and scouting and figuring out, okay, here's where the deer typically like to travel and why they're doing it, and then figuring out what's the best way to enter that. Even if there's been times where I've walked all the way around the public land to get on the backside to come in. So every situation is different. Once again, you find out where they're at, where they're bedding, where they're typically wanting to go feed, try to find those travel routes, and then the first thing I'm going to ask myself is what's the best entry into this area, and then I'm going to look for a tree. If I can't get into an area, I don't care if I find the perfect tree in the perfect spot, I'm probably wasting my time with that tree if I try to hunt it if I can't get in there.
And what's your primary? I guess you're not only are you looking for like a means to get there, but a means to get there without spooking deer, I'm assuming.
Yeah, typically what I like to do in this area of the country where I live right here is I use a lot of ravines, low spots, dips in the land to kind of get into creeks. In fact, there's a lot of the creeks, we get a lot of flash flooding, so there's a lot of timber in them. I will typically go in June and July, chainsaw or handsaw, whatever, and clear those creeks out so I can walk up them. The deer typically don't walk in them because there's so much trash and timber in them, so they're walking up on the tops of the, God, if you can call it a ridge here, I guess you'd call it that, but maybe it's only a 10-foot elevation drop, but they'll tend to stick to the top part where I'm actually down in all the junk getting in and out. So it's a gamble in some spots. You're trying to find the best way in. You'll learn real quickly.
Well, we're getting kind of long on time here. Adam, did you have any last questions? I got one more, but did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
I guess I have one last question. At what point in your hunting career did you make that transition from what you would consider to be a novice to more hitting your success, your successful goals, or hitting your goals that you placed before yourself? And really, what triggered that transition?
Well, to me, there are stages of a hunter. When I first got into it, it was more about filling tags. That's how I measured success was, if I had 4 deer tags, 2 buck, 2 doe, how many of those tags did I fill? And then I think as you get to it, the challenge is there to start finding those better bucks and stuff. So, for me, it was a gradual, like I said, the first one was a little forky, I think, that I shot, and then it was maybe an 8-point, and I slowly progressed. The big leap for me was when the Air Force moved me to Montana. When I got to Montana, just the sheer number of game animals I could hunt just opened my eyes. So I spent a lot of time chasing elk and mule deer, but I also opened a taxidermy business, and I started seeing the bigger bucks coming in. I got to know Gene and Barry Winslow. I went to a lot of taxidermy shops. I have some good friends in Iowa. So I started seeing what was out there. And so I started looking for those. It was just a gradual transition. Now I've gotten to where it's not really the size of the horn that gets me. It's hunting a specific animal. I get to know one target animal, and I try to really know them well. And it's almost like that cat and mouse encounter with that deer. They usually know I'm after them, after a couple of hunts and stuff. And it just becomes almost like a chess game and trying to outwit that deer. And 9 times out of 10, I lose. But I walk away with more lessons and stuff. And it's just that challenge that really does it for me now. In fact, I'm kind of transitioning now into where it's actually really just the hunt experience. The people I'm hunting with, the friendships, the stories, campfires, and stuff like that is becoming more and more important. And taking the animal myself is becoming less. And I'm, if I can get my grandsons or my kids or whatever on an animal, that I get as much satisfaction out of that as I do chasing them myself. So, I think you go through stages.
Well, just to wrap things up, for that guy that is trying to take it to the next level in his hunting, what would you say maybe the number one mistake you see hunters making, whether that be public or private land? And what would you say would be the number one suggestion you think maybe somebody should try something different?
Well, I thought about that question earlier when you sent it, and to nail it down to one mistake is really hard. I will say this. You've got to have fun. If you go into a season just dog determined and it's all work and you're putting in the long hours, I myself have burned myself out doing that. So to me, remember why you're there. You know, it's not about killing that animal as much as it's that journey and having fun and learning. And so for me, the number one thing I'd say is keep that positive mindset that it's not about killing the animal as much as it's about hunting and learning. And then the second thing is, you know what, you got to be persistent. You got to put your time in the right locations, and you got to put your time in the off season. And you know, the more it's like anything else, the more you put into it, the more you're learning, the more knowledge you get, the more those pieces tend to kind of come together. You know, and then the last thing I'm going to say, you know, these are deer we're hunting. These are not super brainiac hybrid animals that they're still whitetail deer, and they're not the hardest thing in the world. They're pretty patternable animals. There's 4 basic needs of a whitetail, and you know, let's not make this out to be something more than what it is. And especially today, man, anyone that's hunted 40 years ago will know immediately that back then there was not near the number of animals that we've got today. So put yourself in the right spot, stay persistent, keep it about having fun, learn what you can, and those encounters are going to increase as a result of that. But if you go in there with the mindset, I've got to have the encounters, you know, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse, and you know, more times you're going to get discouraged and disappointed and burnt out, and the season's going to become really long and hard. So
I think that's some great advice. You know, this interview as a whole, I think whether somebody's been hunting for, you know, they're getting ready to have their first season, or maybe they've been hunting for 40 years, I think there's got to be something somebody could get out of what you shared with us. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and you know, I hope everyone out there takes everything I say with a grain of salt. What works for me is not going to work for everyone else. So, you know, find what works for you.
Well, David, how can guys, you know, maybe learn more about the way you hunt and what you do? I know you're on some forums, and I know you've got some YouTube, and maybe even somebody might want to get a hold of you and ask a question. Where can somebody that's interested maybe find out some more information about you?
All right. Well, I'm on huntingbeast.com and saddlehunter.com primarily. They can leave a message. I don't get on there as much as I used to. I did have a YouTube, I guess it's still out there. I have a YouTube channel where I posted some videos of some of my do-it-yourself. They could leave me a message there. Or, you know, I hate to give my email out, but, you know, if they want to contact me, they can private message you
on a forum board if you want to pick one of those instead of throwing your email out in public.
Yeah, huntingbeast.com or saddlehunter.com. They can PM me. I try to get in there at least once every 2-3 weeks and stuff. So
and I think your name is Dave T. and then some numbers. Is that
1963? Year I was born.
Okay, what is that again?
Dave T. 1963.
Okay, and the forum he mentioned was the Hunting Beast, which we haven't really gotten into on the podcast, but I can tell you what, that website has completely changed the way I think about hunting. I found that a few years ago, and we all know I'm no expert, but there's some really good hunters on there. That's how I found Dave, actually, a lot of things that'll really get your gears turning in your head about maybe some ways you can do things differently. And a lot of those guys are up north, but they really know a lot about deer and deer hunting, so you can apply a lot of what they say to whatever your area is.
Yep. And the saddlehunter.com for those of you who are interested in saddle hunting, there's some great guys over there and some great ideas, and they can and they're very friendly, so you can PM those guys and they'll send you videos and pictures and so if you have any questions on any of the gear, go check out my YouTube. If you have any questions on the gear I use or how I use it, just shoot me a PM and I will get back to you at some point.
And I think your YouTube is David Toms. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Boy, I set these things up and I don't even know what I'm doing half the time.
There's some pretty interesting videos on there. Adam mentioned watching them some, and I've watched them some, and there's some videos that might be on there sideways, and and it's not there for the videography, but
I don't think I'm going to pick up a second career in videography,
take your nausea medicine before you watch it, but most importantly, listen, because I think what's important there is what you have to say, not necessarily what's on the video.
You betcha.
David, it's been a pleasure. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
All right, guys. Well, hey, thanks for asking me to do this. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot again, Dave. Adam, I really enjoyed that interview. I knew David had some maybe things that were a little bit different that he did, and some things that he did that, kind of go the extra mile, and he did not disappoint. I was definitely surprised and by some of his tactics and some things that I might want to try. Definitely got the gears turning.
Yeah, I really enjoy talking to someone with, that much experience in the field. I think you said 40 years of bow hunting. That's just a lot of time to have different experiences and be able to pass that information along. And I believe he's the type of guy that I could just sit down and talk to all night about deer hunting and not get bored with the topic any whatsoever. And also the type of guy you'd like to tag along and mentor you,
Yeah, I feel like in an evening like that, he'd be doing a lot of the talking and me just doing a lot of listening, because he's definitely got a lot of experience to share with us. So that was a lot of fun. I'm hoping we can find some more off the map guys, kind of like David, that we can, kind of expand everyone's horizons with. But it's really interesting.
Most definitely.
Well, let's get this thing wrapped up. Everybody, please keep up the ratings and reviews. We've got, I think last time I checked, we're up to 9 on iTunes, and we got some on Stitcher too. So I really, really appreciate those people that have taken the time to do that. I actually set up my own iTunes account and reviewed some other people because I felt like I was a hypocrite all this time. So I've gotten some of mine done. If you haven't reviewed yet, we're getting a lot of downloads. So I know there's a lot of people that haven't reviewed, and I know it's a pain in the neck, but it's going to help the podcast out. We're going to get up higher on the rankings, which is going to help us be able to pull some more guests. And the more downloads and higher in the rankings we can get, we'll be able to get some attention from more popular names. So if you can do that for us, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, the other ask would be if our social media, I don't think either one of us has spent a whole lot of time trying to push that and to grow either one of our pages. But if you could go out there, facebook.com/downsouthhunt, and at least follow us there and on the Twitter, which is Mike.
Yeah, that's Down S Hunt.
I can never remember it.
I try to keep it a little shorter for Twitter. That way, if anybody wants to message us, it's not, Down South Hunt is a little bit longer. So Twitter, try to keep things short, 140 characters. And if you want, just send us a question or send us a message on Twitter. We'll retweet anything you guys mention about the podcast. I guess on Facebook we can share it, or I guess that goes right on our page. So yeah, Twitter will retweet it. Whatever else we'll share, however else we can. But we appreciate any interaction you can give us and keep that going.
We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Adam, you got any news with Grizzly Bean Coffee? Anything new and changing, or any specials you got going on?
No specials, nothing really changing right now. Still working on some individual serve packs. I'm going to keep it super secret of what's going on, but I do have some sample testers out there, and I want to say thank you to everyone that's been testing it out and giving me the feedback and helping me develop the product more and more in the packaging. So more to come within the summer, and hopefully launching this new product in September. That is the goal. By elk season is when I want to have this launched.
If you are a coffee connoisseur and you want to be a super secret tester, hit Adam up. He didn't tell me to do this, but I think you need some more super secret testers, and hit him up on social media. Make sure everybody sees it, and maybe you can get some super secret samples. That's hard to say, man. Super secret samples.
Super secret samples. I have not turned down any testers. It has been free coffee bags. So you want some coffee, give me a shout. I'll send you out a sample pack.
Man, that sounds like a deal right there. And give that review so you can win a full bag of free coffee.
Yeah, you get a whole, almost a pound.
Yeah, 12 ounces. That's like pretty much a pound.
So, well, here's a little something. I've never actually weighed it. It actually when I have weighed it, it comes in at a pound, but I call it 12 ounces. So there's a fairly good chance that I've been selling 1 pound coffee at 12 ounce price. So hey, there's some information.
Like you need to have like what does it always say? Like 33% more free. Anyway,
that's a good
quick
point.
math, by the way, guys. I just want everybody to realize
you are a finance major, right?
I was a finance major. I wish it helped me with my finances some more, but yes, I did graduate. All right, good night, everybody. Thanks for listening, and hopefully we'll be releasing another podcast in another 7 to 10 days.
Hey, and do something cool down south.